Welcome to the Small Business Success Tips podcast with me, your host, Neil McDonnell. In this podcast, we strive to provide key information and tips that will help small businesses like yours learn how to more effectively present your services to possible federal sector buyers. In each episode, a small business champion joins us to share their knowledge and experience with you. While they will have different titles, their common goal is to help the federal government benefit from what small businesses offer. These guests donate their time because they realize not everyone has the budget or time to meet them in person, and we thank them for that. Our guest today is Lani MacRae. She's been with the Department of Energy since 1991 and is currently a small business program manager working at the Golden Field office outside of Denver, Colorado, in support of DOE's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office. I've had the pleasure of talking with Lani before, and not only is she an incredible resource for small businesses doing their homework on DOE opportunities, she's super helpful. You'll see for yourself in this podcast how helpful Lani is, and I highly recommend you to reach out to her as one of your early stops on navigating DOE. So welcome, Lani, and thank you for joining us today. I know you're an awesome advocate of small businesses, but perhaps you can start off by telling us why you think small businesses are valuable.
Well, thank you, Neil. I really appreciate the time, and I would like to answer that question. Of course, we all know that the big statistics, over 90%. I can't zero in exactly what that is. The economy is driven, and those are the big statements, cornerstone of what makes our country great, and huge contributor to the country's economy. But why I really love small businesses is they epitomize freedom, they epitomize liberty, capitalism, entrepreneurship. They allow people to innovate without anyone telling them what to do or stifling them with bureaucracy. They're free to choose to make a mistake, and they aren't afraid to make those choices. And if you contrast that with other situations, especially like maybe large corporations where there's a more bureaucratic structure, there's always a Damocles sword hanging. And that's not every corporation, of course, but it's a lot of places where you really can't choose. You really can't suggest a new line of product. It's really not up to you to have that freedom to expand and be all that you really can be. And I think small business allows people to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I love hearing you relate small business ownership and entrepreneurship to freedom and liberty. I haven't heard it put that way, but that's exactly what I think some of us feel. A lot of responsibility, but freedom and liberty. One of the things I wanted to learn a little bit about before we get started and maybe some of the actual tips is I really don't know much about Department of Energy, and I feel there might be one or two other people out there who aren't as familiar. Can you share just from a high level a little bit about maybe the organization and priorities, and also maybe touch a little bit on the budget as you might see it for 2018 and even 2019, if you're able to talk to that?
So I'm glad to do that in just a kind of a vague way on the budget part. But if you look at the department, it was all pulled together. I believe it was in 1977. And what they did was I think they pulled everything together that sounded like it could be under an energy umbrella. So there was all these little disparate parts. And now they've all come because the department has all the power administrations under it, all the national labs, a lot of the grid work. And you would think, well, it's the Department of Energy, it's got to be about energy. Well, it's really not. It's about research. And this is the second largest budget that comes out of Congress every year. And 85% of it goes to the national lab system. There's 17 national labs. They take on research that corporations aren't going to risk doing. Maybe the work is too in-depth, intense, and it's really not something a university or a corporation wants to do. So like building a cyclotron and all that stuff. One of the main missions of the department is cleanup. And so we're still cleaning up from the Manhattan Project, which is probably astounding to a lot of the folks that are listening. But that's one of the main missions, and then all the money that goes into the labs. So everything that, well, so many things that we know in the whole world that are incredible, innovations and inventions like solar panels and the wind turbines and even LED lights, all these things that all of us take for granted, they came out of the labs. Working now with, of course, industry and business. So they have a lot of opportunities for small businesses also, which we can get to when we talk about resources. And be glad to help folks zero in on that if they feel like it's an appropriate target for them. What they do need to do is a little bit of research, because some are defense labs and some are other kinds, like the one we support next door. I sit on the campus, is National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And so they have all the renewable and then all the efficiency technologies. So they have geothermal and wind and solar, and then they also have material science, and I think they do some diesel research here and fuel cells. So you want to know what that lab does to see if you can fit in, if your niche matches their research topics.
You know, one of the things, Lani, that I've always, and maybe I've been getting this wrong all these years, but you know, I've been doing government contracting very tightly for more than 10 years, but certainly the last 10 years. And I always got the impression that DOE was almost required a higher level of security clearances than in DOD, or at least at that level, like maybe a lot of TS clearances. And so I had navigated away from even knocking on DOE's door because I thought it was, and maybe I'm putting this onto the super secret stuff, but are there areas where those of us without facility clearances or TS clearances, et cetera, can begin to get in and do work there?
Absolutely. There's, everybody has admin. Every facility has maintenance. Every facility has all the land work, and every facility has IT. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and they list them in a lot of ways, different ways than you can access them. So I don't think a top clearance security pass should put anybody off from exploring these type of labs and their opportunities. As a matter of fact, NREL, where I sit in Golden, they have, I believe, a 53% of small business achievement. And that's very high. Most of the labs, they hire a lot of small business.
Yeah, that is amazing. That's always good for small businesses to hear. A lot of small businesses sometimes think that going to the underperformers is the place to go, when the reality is go where they're exceeding their goals, because clearly they believe that small businesses can support them. Let me ask you a kind of a related question. So on the security side, and it begins to make sense as you're explaining the labs, but what about from a vehicle standpoint, or the way they bundle together types of work? And I don't mean category management, which I don't need to talk about at all. But like in the Air Force, for example, all IT now goes through this one vehicle, and so that's the path you have to go. Does DOE have some buying patterns that you can share with us, or preferred vehicles?
Well, they do have a vehicle for IT. And then they also have a vehicle, and I won't say that those words category management either, but they have the communication contract also. And it's tough. It is a trend. And I think that the smarter people get about this will surely help them out. We're talking GSA schedules, and the bigger best-in-class vehicles. People have to know what those mean. And I think that they have to take the time to explore them, invest in them, and get on the list.
What about on the construction side, facility side, any large type? I'm an IT person, so I tend to gravitate that way. But we've got a lot of people who are listeners who are on the facilities or construction side. Do you know of any large vehicles that are kind of pushed through there, or is that more locality based?
No, I don't. I think the labs they don't participate. So they do their own thing per facility. So or they might have a couple of labs in the same area that might find it more efficient to do some bundling. And that I don't know for sure. But for the department's needs for communication and IT, I know that they're centralizing, strategically sourcing, whatever you want to call it, from one place, those services. But
yeah. And that's fine.
Construction, I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, and that's I'm finding that's pretty typical across the departments. So how about we switch into more of the success tips, because I know you and I were chatting a little bit beforehand, and you've got some really good thoughts on how small businesses can be successful in general around marketing. And so how about I open up the conversation in that direction? What would you say, actually,
Sure.
Before you go into sharing some of the specific tips you have, when you think about how you or some of your peers on the procurement side do market research, can you share the typical type path small businesses should expect to see you coming out and doing market research? And the reason I ask that is, if you're coming out on Avenue A, then I want to be at the end of Avenue A, so you find me. B, C, D, the same thing, right? How do you guys do market research?
Right.
Or how does DOE do market research?
Well, I think DOE is different than my organization. My organization doesn't have a lot of opportunities right now. It was kind of on a little bit in the budget. I haven't seen a lot of movement, but of course, not sure what's going to go on next. So I have to be kind of vague and stupid about that. But so we don't have a lot of opportunities right now. And what we do have is a lot of times pretty specialized in the engineering services group, or
let me correct. I'm sorry if I can cut in really quick. Let me just correct it, because when I was talking about it, it's less about current opportunities and more about, say you guys were flush with money and opportunities. How do you begin to go out and find small businesses that potentially can do the work? Like, what's those typical process tools that you use to do market research?
Well, they go to the database for SAMs or SBA. They also go to the schedules if they've decided they want to do it on the schedule. There's also a pretty robust database that I have, and that's mandatory for them to look at. Just saying. So folks send their information there.
And your database is like a compilation of metadata and maybe a capability statement?
Absolutely. And so that's really what I'd like to talk about.
Sure.
I've done lots of matchups and spoken to a lot of small businesses at every stage. And even ones that are of that, they're of a different kind of socioeconomic category, where they've been around a while, but some of the Native American, and they can go for pretty big contracts, and they can sole source them. So that's lucky for them. But I've even taken a look at their capability statements, and I always have an idea that this subject is left on the table while there's so many other things that they have to do. So they throw something together, and they don't really think about their marketing, their corporate resume. And I know that you do it once, boy, that's it. But you sure don't do that when you get a job or you go for a job. You have a tailored resume to the job you want. So my little mission in life, because I have a huge communication and PR and campaign background in the government. So I know how they look at things, and I know what they're looking for. And I've talked to a lot of CEOs. They're not seeing it on some of the capability statements. So I've made it my little like niche or side interest to help small businesses get those tools up to snuff. And it's just like when you present yourself, you wear nice clothes and you're well groomed. It's the same thing with your marketing materials. So I just wanted to bring up a few things, and that's the contract officer is going to give you about 6 seconds. And that's not a lot of time to look at a capability statement. So what you have to have is everything on there they need to see. And they need to see the CAS code. They need to see a DUNS number. They need to see what socioeconomic category you're in. And they have to see that up for the front, because they're usually looking, wow, can we set this aside? So that's important. They need to see core competencies, past performance. But there's a trick. People read in a Z. They read documents in that pattern. So they start at the left, they go to the right, they go down at a diagonal, and then they go to the right. So everything you want somebody to see should be in that pathway. Now, when you take this stuff and you put it on the web, people read in an F pattern. F like Frank. Just want to make sure that's audible. So when you put the same info up, you got to recast it. And that's kind of how we've been taught since the internet was born, right? Things are usually in an F. The stuff's on the left, your menu, and then your contents on the right. So that's just a little trick there.
Let me ask let me ask you really quick. You were saying, so you mentioned 5 things, and I don't know if you meant to put it there, but to me, I just see it. But you have CAGE, you have DUNS, you have socio-status. I'm assuming you also have like NAICS, core competencies, and past performance. If I'm looking at and I know you're about to say you probably have something to share with us, but just following that pattern, is there a priority order of that information? If I only had one thing on there, it would be this, and then the second thing this. Are you able to? I always like prioritization, because people say, well, they're all high priority. It's like, well, you can't do that in prioritization.
Well, there's 6 key areas. Okay. Core competency, past performance, differentiators, and I sure wish there was a different word for that. I just hate that word, but everybody gets it. Then corporate data, contact, and optional. So those are the key areas. But your core competencies, they really should be first. And there's a lot of clever ways. You know, you have your branding like in the left-hand corner. There's a lot of clever ways. Some people, they write this tome about their company that nobody's going to read. So, and it takes up this real estate that you need for other stuff, because you really need a list. People want to see a list. They want to get it quick. Can they do this, this, and this? Are they, you know, all the words for the IT stuff.
Sure. We want to tell you how great we are and how much we know, rather than help you make a decision.
Well, you want to also say what you're certified in. The ISO blah, blah, the 7628, whatever those are. You want to say those, because anybody that's looking for an IT wants to know if you can do advanced, or, you know, they want to know where you are, right?
Yep, and I put that in like corporate data. So.
Right. I didn't critique your capability statement. Maybe I should have.
Well, no, I'm glad you didn't do it before the call. That's for sure.
Yeah, and then people, here's another little strange tip. If you put something gold or yellow on your capability statement, it doesn't hold type. That's the term for it. And then, even worse, some people don't have color printers. So when they print it off, it comes out in black and white and you've lost some text. So you want to make sure that you always put your product through a printer, a black and white. Now, another thing is people will give me a capability statement and then I'll look up their website and it's like, is this the same company? They don't match them up. Different colors, different, somebody got creative, right? Oh, we have this guy in the office. He's really good at making a website. So there's something up there that's so totally different. And then their business card's different too. So everything's got to flow from the same thought.
It's funny. I'm writing as fast as I can because this is exactly what I hope for from these podcasts, right? I'm not trying to make some perfect audio quality. What I'm really trying to do is to provide the tips from people like you. And in right there, for example, I support the HubZone Chamber of Commerce, which is a bunch of HubZone companies, and the logo we tend to use is yellow, and I've never printed that thing on a black and white printer to go, what does it look like? Is it something so simple that we can address that fixes it? And then, but so the number one tip I'm pulling right out of there is print it on black and white, because if the government is going to be doing that occasionally, you want to see what it looks like rather than be surprised.
Right, exactly. And then if you're going to do it once, you're going to do it again in 4 months when you go see them in person. So you want them to have like a visual memory. So it should be dynamic to some point. There's this guy, and he won't mind me telling you. I met him at a conference, and I looked at his capability statement. It was just blue and white. That's it. This guy was he did a construction job. It was environmental. I think it was about digging deep, something like that. The guy was SDV WOSB, nice looking man. So here's his picture, and it's in black and white, and he's scowling, or he's not smiling. And I finally said, I just can't help it. Could you change your picture out on this? and he did. And, he said, I've gotten jobs. And he was smiling. And he had a beard, and he looked like a soldier. But that little change just made his whole capability statement come alive. And you really wanted to read it.
Well, Lani, that was so nice of you, because that's the whole classic thing of a colleague of mine. She advocates this constantly on how she knows who her friends are. It's the ones who tell her she has spinach in her teeth. And that's exactly what you did to this person. You didn't worry about, oh, I feel embarrassed. You're like, no, maybe they don't even know. And I'm with you. If I'm scowling, or if I don't, if I have something that's making me look odd, I really would appreciate it. And I can imagine that person did the same thing. So let me ask, I'm going to switch over and ask you in a minute about some tools and resources you might have that people can reach out to or get. But you were throwing a lot of good tips, and I just wanted to see if I could pull, get any more out of you there. Do you have other tips related to capability statements, like do this, or don't ever do this?
And so a lot of people go, oh my gosh, then they start listing all these projects. You know what? Nobody's going to read through all those, but what you can do is show that you've worked through your past performance with and similar to the agency you're tagging up to. You don't want to do daycares. You've done stuff for daycares. If you're going towards a technical firm, you want to keep it in line with, oh yeah, I've worked for this company that did technical stuff. But rather than write up the whole project, put their brand, put the Department of Energy seal, and now I might get in real trouble for that, but maybe not, because it's on the web. And if you do that, it shows. You're going to have to back it up. It can't be a lie. So,
I see what you're saying. Put the don't worry about you saying it, because we all go out there and I call it like a wall of badges or something, where we just start putting them all out there. But I like what you're saying. Pick a couple that are really key, and it showcases it better than listing them all.
Right. And so federal specific info is negs codes, just the numbers. If you have room, put the title. But anybody that's looking at you is going to know, that you're somebody they're interested in. Cash, DUNS, right. I have on my list accepts credit and purchase cards. I think that is for a certain level of small business. Definitely GSA schedule numbers and any other federal contract vehicles and your socioeconomic certifications. That to me is almost the second thing. If you put your brand on the left, you put your SDV, OSB, or your hub zone on the right. Let them see right away, because that differentiates you from a small business that doesn't have those. And I wanted to just say one thing before we get to the tools, because that's going to be real easy. I've been reading reports, and I'm seeing increasingly competitive marketplace in the federal contracting. That's not a big surprise. But what is interesting to me is that there's fewer people that are employed by the government to handle it, to handle outreach and acquisition. So, and then there's, so if there's more competition and there's less people, that's why you have to bother. You have to stand out. And your materials, one way to do it. Your, of course, professionalism and response on your, on the opportunities is another. And that's a whole other conversation, except for please edit and please follow the directions, because stuff comes in here. We had a a company that forgot to send it in on time, and they'd been on this IDIQ list prior. They forgot, so heads rolled there because the opportunity was for billions of dollars worth of work over the next 5 years, and somebody was careless.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I have 4-year-old twin boys, and I teach them attention to detail. It's like in our house, it's stay alert, stay alive. Complacency loses you $1 billion IDIQ. Hey, we're getting towards the end, and I wanted to ask you kind of a question towards the last question. But you were talking about some tools and resources, and I wanted to give you a chance to maybe mention some of those so that people can hear about them.
Okay, so yeah, all they have to do is here's the place: Small Business Questions at EE. That's like elephant, right? .doe.gov. And what I have is a wireframe. They can dump their stuff into it. 2 different versions of a wireframe capability statement that allows them to take maybe a jumbled look into a nice neat. I mean, it's very basic, but it'll clean you up. And I'll also send you my made-up company that we stuck stuff in so you can see what it looks like. And then I have a checklist so that you could write stuff out, see how many words it takes, how much space you have. And then if anybody wants a directory for the small business people, for the Department of Energy, or the link for the DOCAST, it's a what do they call this? Yeah, it's called the DOCAST. That sounded weird when I said it, but it's all the opportunities DOE has.
Like the forecast. The
forecast. That's right. That's what it is.
That's funny.
God, I look at it
I wonder if DOCAST is like Department of Energy cast.
Oh, yeah. So sorry. But let me just say something really quick. Sure. We had a communications firm want a communications contract here. So we got like 10 bids on this. One of them had misspelled words. But because we didn't have that down as an evaluation factor, they didn't get kicked out. But can you imagine? So people have to have somebody who hasn't looked at their piece edit it. That's just a basic rule.
Right. No, I'm with you. Okay, so let me ask you. I kind of gave you a heads up about this, but I know you've been sharing a lot, and so sometimes you might have already shared the last tip. But I'm curious on as we wrap up this podcast, if you've got a a tip or a last minute thing you really want small businesses to know as advice for them on how to be successful?
I think there's a lot of things to think about, but if they're just cognizant on the trends, I just know so many companies are going to GSA. I mean, GSA's put up this great big acquisition gateway. So I think if you want some of the bigger contracts, you have to do that. You have to know what that is and just get smart. I think there's a lot of small opportunities too that maybe you just don't go for all the big ones, and know that when you're with the Department of Energy and you're looking for subcontracting opportunities, you might have to start building a relationship first. It's just not going to be a contract tomorrow, and I hate to say that because I know you got to keep working.
No, but that's great advice. I mean, and that's so small businesses can't always hear what they want, but if they hear what they need to hear, then they can be successful as we move forward. We all know it's an 18, 24-month life cycle, so that's perfect advice on tracking the trends. So thank you very much, Lani. I know I speak for our listeners when I say thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and all those great tips. Can you let our listeners know how they can reach you specifically or your office if they have other questions?
Sure. Small business questions at ee.doe.gov. That's where they all come in, and then I'll respond to them from my email. So they'll have my email address and phone, and they can call or write, whatever.
Okay. And one thing we didn't talk about, and typically I don't too much because these events the podcast lasts forever, but I would definitely, for small businesses, follow up with Lani on hearing about events, because I know that she helps manage events that are targeted specifically towards helping small businesses. This podcast is being recorded in June and July. I know she's got an event, and I'm sure it happens every year. So definitely reach out to her and do that. Last thing I'll say as we wrap up this episode is I wanted to remind the listeners of a few things. First, go ahead and click the subscribe button to make sure you're notified when new episodes are released. This also helps those of us who work on the podcast know you're out there and listening. Second, if you find this podcast valuable, think others would too, go ahead and please share a note about us on one of the LinkedIn or one of the other social media platforms. I'm your host, Neil McDonnell. I thank you for listening to this episode and hope you'll join us again for other episodes. Remember, you're just one contract away. Go make it happen.